NFL Primetime. He could go all the way. Touchdown. It's a fumble. NFL Primetime, next.
If you've been following my channel or sports games over the years, you're probably aware of my favorite NFL video game, ESPN NFL 2K5. That game was the complete package, and one of its highlights was the impressive use of ESPN presentation. And while this was first fully introduced in the series with ESPN NFL Football, also known as NFL 2K4, that actually wasn't the first time an NFL game used ESPN-themed presentation all throughout. ESPN NFL Primetime 2002, like Sony's NBA series post-NBA Shootout that I recently covered, was ahead of its time. Featuring beautiful and now nostalgic broadcast packages, menu design, music, and commentary, along with a surprisingly solid franchise mode and some really smooth and fluid gameplay, Konami's last NFL game is actually one I find to be slightly underrated. There's a pretty good chance this is your first time ever hearing about this game. During a time when there were numerous NFL games on the market, all fighting to be recognized, Konami's last attempt didn't sell very well, and despite all that it had going for it, it wasn't received well by critics either. The controls and AI were a big step down from nearly every other football game at the time, which makes sense given that this was the first game in what could have been a series. When there is a lot of competition in one sector, however, there's very little room for error, and that was it for Konami's NFL run. Despite the game being a commercial failure and relatively forgotten today, its legacy lives on through. Just like with Sony's NBA titles, 2K, Konami pioneered this authentic, TV-mimicking presentation, and 2K later perfected it. If not for this game, ESPN NFL 2K4 or 2K5 may not have become such legendary titles. Let's take a look at Konami's failed NFL game, ESPN NFL Primetime 2002, an ambitious, innovative title that was ahead of its time, although flawed. The best part of this game is the vibe it creates. Using full ESPN integration, everything from the menus to the in-game action feels like a TV presentation. The menus all have a retro Sports Center vibe, and the game's soundtrack is a collection of iconic ESPN football compositions. I love when sports games go this route. While a well-curated soundtrack of licensed music isn't always bad, I always prefer the NFL films or ESPN-style music that makes me feel immersed in the world of that sport. Chris Berman and Tom Jackson handle the commentary, and it's pretty solid for a 20-year-old game. You'll hear Berman say his iconic, "He could go all the way," and Tom Jackson will give insight on specific players, field conditions, even what types of cleats players will wear before the game. It's a nostalgic duo if you've been watching football since the 2000s. The score bug is nearly identical to what would later be in 2K games, as it was ESPN's at the time. Throughout the game, the commentary will go over stats as they pop up on the screen. You'll notice an actual coin toss presentation, cheerleaders on the sidelines, referees will actually throw flags onto the field, get knocked down, and even signal if a field goal is good or not. Yet in Madden 23, a game over 20 years newer, refs aren't even present because the PlayStation 5 just can't handle it. Right. Players will celebrate after big plays or look sad after bad ones. Before games, you'll notice players warming up and stretching. The attention to detail is pretty good with accurate stadiums and even player face scans. On replays, there was even a depth of field blur effect, which was pretty unheard of and pretty advanced for the time. The presentation was clearly the inspiration for 2K's later football games, but it wasn't nearly as good here. The crowd noise never changes and is lifeless. There is no halftime show and no post-game show. When you win a Super Bowl, the announcers briefly mention it, and then it's over. Presentation was great for its time, but obviously it wasn't good enough to sell the game, or to be remembered by the majority of sports fans. But again, for a game from 2001, not bad at all, and it was ahead of Madden 2002. Franchise mode was actually pretty solid. What impressed me the most was the loading times. After playing PS2 Madden recently, the worst part is how long it takes to simulate, whether it's games or the off-season. This game just blows through everything like it's nothing. You can choose to play or watch any game, even games that don't include your user team, so you could watch the Super Bowl without interfering, or play it yourself because this is a video game. In Madden 23, this is not an option. You can go through many seasons here, drafting new players, reading their scouting reports, which give a surprising amount of detail with strengths and weaknesses. You get to bid on free agents, sign draft picks to custom contracts, and of course make trades. There was no standout original feature here, but there was also nothing major missing. And again, all of this while the incredible ESPN music plays in the background. When playing a game in exhibition mode, you could create custom scenarios, just like situation mode in older sports games, which is always welcome. And I'm not sure why newer sports games don't have something like this. Sometimes I want to jump into a game with 4 seconds left and throw a Hail Mary, and do it over and over again until it works. Where did this go? Practice mode is exactly how it sounds, just simple practice versus defense, or just with the offense on the field. The only other game mode is tournament mode, which allows you to play 4 through 16 teams, do an optional fantasy draft, and you can even trade players inside that tournament. There was no create a team, no career mode, and no minigames. It was relatively bare bones, but for 2001, that was acceptable. So far, this sounds like a solid game. Maybe not that deep of a game, but a solid NFL game with good presentation that was ahead of its time. So why was it a failure? Well, gameplay just wasn't as good as it was on the competition's games. There are a lot of sliders and settings to adjust, which is nice, such as gameplay speed, but actual gameplay can get a bit messy. It's not all bad. This game actually has some fantastic looking animations for its time. Tackles look great, and there are some really cool animations for them. It's a very fast and fluid game, but it can often look jarring. The animations will chain together in an artificial way that doesn't look great. Blocking is pretty basic. The linemen either pancake their man, get pancaked, or best case scenario they just stand there not moving. The pocket simply doesn't form. The AI also fails to make any defensive adjustments, so you can run the same play over and over and over and destroy. Sometimes you'll see a hole, but be unable to hit it as your player just runs in place because the player models of the offensive linemen have way too large of a hitbox. At least in late game situations, the AI will run out of bounds, call timeouts, or run out the clock if they are ahead. Throwing the ball isn't bad, as throws get a decent arc, but it's pretty random if catches are made or not. Sometimes a wide open man will miss the catch. Sometimes throwing into triple coverage works. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or rhythm to it. It's still fun though. This is a game from 2001, and every football game from that year was basic compared to what we would later see. These issues are excusable for the time, but Konami was competing with EA, 2K, Sony, Microsoft, and Midway, so they had to really stand out to get noticed. While they hoped the ESPN presentation would do just that, it didn't, and this was the last NFL game Konami ever made. It's still worth checking out today, as it almost feels like a beta version of what we'd later get in 2K football games, with some foreign-feeling gameplay that is actually pretty fun. Watching the AI play itself is also surprisingly entertaining. The rosters at the time were really cool, as this was the season Drew Bledsoe got hurt and Tom Brady took over, leading his team to a Super Bowl victory. If anything, this game has value because you can recreate that exact scenario or keep Bledsoe in and change history. ESPN NFL Primetime 2002 was obviously a commercial failure and also a critical failure, as standards set by reviewers seemed to be a lot higher back then, probably because of competition in the marketplace. It was by no means a bad game, with fun gameplay that would have had potential if Konami continued building upon it. Most importantly, this game was created during the peak of NFL video game competition, before the NFL got greedy and signed an exclusive rights agreement with the worst possible company for consumers EA, who has been holding that license hostage for almost 2 decades now. During this time, 2K saw the potential in what Konami was creating, bought the ESPN license themselves, and improved upon it, delivering us some of the greatest sports video games of all time. If not for competition, that likely never would have happened, and current Madden releases are proof of just how bad things can get without it. Even if Primetime 02 seems like a complete failure, it had an impact, and for a brief moment, NFL video games peaked in the mid-2000s, and you can thank Konami in part for that. Thanks for watching.